good morning, everybody. How are you today? It's 11 a.m. on a Friday, and typically you see my wonderful face right here on KUHS streaming to you. It's 360 Performance on a Friday. I'm Dr. Whiteman. Some know me as Coach, and today we're going to talk about motivation, getting excited. Where does it come from? How do you measure it? We're going to look at those aspects of it, and we're also going to define a term that I coined myself. Intrinsic motivational intelligence. What is your IMI? Athletically, corporately, just hanging out with your friends. What is it that drives you to get excited about someone or something? As you know, in my world, it's about athletics and high-performance athletes. We'll give you some examples of that as it relates to the intrinsic motivational intelligence, but really it's the primary focus today is about measuring your desire from inside. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between intrinsic, the internal, and then the external or extrinsic aspects of motivation. I think most of you may already know this, I am pretty much an intrinsic motivation kind of person. And I know it derives from inside, but that takes more courage, which is why I think the extrinsic theorists about motivation many years ago got popular, because it was easy, it was simple, it was easy to think about. Oh, money is my motivator. No, that's outside of you. Oh, it's a pretty face, it's a beautiful setting, that motivates me. It's a sunrise, that motivates me. I'm not denying that those are not resources. They are resources. They are resources that get us excited, but they are not organically the source of what drives you and consistently keeps you on track. That's intrinsic. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. That's our theme today. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about our mindset moment for this week and the quotes that drive the mindset moment. And it comes from somebody that I have studied for years and years. It's Edward Deming, and Dr. Deming has since passed away, but he made his real big footprint in this world by working with the Army Corps of Engineers back post-World War II, when he was a much younger man. But in that experience, helping the Japanese come out of the atomic bomb crisis that would fall upon them, literally fell upon them by the United States, with many discussions about the regrets of that. But he talks about where does the desire come from to work yourself through that trauma, that just cataclysmic event at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And here's a quote that came from him about that for a mindset moment for this week. People are born with intrinsic motivation, self-esteem, dignity, curiosity to learn, joy in learning. We're all born with those things. The intrinsic desire to look at ourselves from an internal point of view and determine what really gets me going, to pursue, to be curious, to enjoy the learning process. And Edward Deming is someone I followed for years and years. He also became very well written and famous for his talks on, as the Japanese call it, Kaizen. Kaizen meaning constant continuous improvement. So he did a lot of work on industry standards, whether it's a manufacturing standard for the threads on a screw or pipe fitting, building those standards that could be universal, global, so that if you have a galvanized pipe for an air conditioning unit in Tokyo, Japan, and you get a job in New York City, New York, you're going to pretty much realize and rely on those standards to be true. So Dr. Deming has been around a number of different high-quality ISO 9000-esque standards, but one that I gravitate to a lot is his quote that I shared today in our mindset moment about intrinsic motivation. You're born with it. And that's where I'm going to focus our attention today, is how do we measure that? Look, in my world of performance work, I want to get to know people quickly. because the consequences of my not knowing them are detrimental. And people don't hire me to just come in and linger and wait for the time to pass to discover things. They want to get going quickly and in a way that really influences results in a very positive and proactive sort of way. So one of the things I focused on over the years is discovering and or devising methods to measure where are you coming from as the player or the person that I'm working with. Why are you here? Answering those questions and measuring the degree of your participation so that I know if you're motivated by having order and structure, how much of that is you? Are you OCD, high degree, or are you someplace in the middle, or are you way on the end and really just kind of, frolic around very loosely with no care or concern about maintaining your attention to time, being on time. If you say something to somebody, you deliver it, but you don't really because there's no structure or order that really drives you. What are those internal desires that we can count on? So we're gonna talk a little bit about that and really expand on the measuring of that, because if I know the degree with which you'll participate, your degree of awareness to other people and things around you, your degree of desire for power, your curiosity, how much you appreciate the constructs of the environment, like the beauty, shape, color, and form. All of those things are part of the things that I will review and talk about in regards to how to measure your intrinsic motivating factors. So, that being said, let's give you some examples. Let me share with you some of those examples. Well, one of those is a colleague of mine who's regretfully no longer with us. His name is Trevor Moad. He was an individual that would get in and understand the pulse of a culture, a sports culture, a corporate culture, and look at the parts, the individuals that make up that culture, to determine what is it that really is the pain point. Where's the sore spot? Where are you dwelling on the negatives, or are you dwelling in some other areas of emotional concerns that I can put my hands around? Now, with as good as Trevor was with his craft, he did not subscribe to a lot of tools that would help him measure it because he didn't really believe in them. And quite honestly, I didn't disagree with him because there weren't many around that were valid, that were statistically and scientifically legitimate. And he used the term legit a lot. But he was bold in his presentation of what he did believe in, and that was the people. He believed in the person and their capability of finding that intangible inside of them, that desire, that intrinsic desire. As much as he might push away theory, he was immersed in it. And he used the psychology of the human beings to define how do you know that you want to be here? What is it the be is, that interest in why am I here? And then when you're here, what can I count on you to do? So I know the hows. And then when you understand their energy, their intrinsic desire, and then the tasks that they want to do to perform them, because that's what their desires are driving them towards, what are you going to get? What's the end result? What are you striving for? You've got the energy, you've got the purposeful intent, now what are you going to get? These are all components of a process in when you measure the pulse of the culture, you measure their desires and how they're motivated, we can then apply that measurement to the steps in that process, that B component, why are you here, and then what are you going to do when you're here, and then when you're doing that, what are you looking at to get out of it? Those are some of the components and models that I look at when I discover, after measuring an individual's or culture's motivation, how to place that information in the right spot so that we become both efficient and effective in our addressment of their needs as a performance group or a performance individual. As we do that, there's no perfection. There's no absolutes. There's going to be times when we got to take a step back and think about what's going on, because people can get overwhelmed. And that's where I get into the mental health continuum. And this is something I drafted up, a graph of thinking that I want to be on kind of the left-hand side of this model. I want to be self-aware to a point that I'm really immersed in my wellness. I really know myself well enough, and to some respects, having a measurement of what my desires are, where my buckets of success or pockets of excellence are in the makeup of my intrinsic drivers. So when I know what those are, I'm fully aware of that, and when I interact with other people and things, I'll have feelings about how those interactions influence my desires, both the ones that are strong as well as the ones that aren't so strong. And by knowing those numbers and measurements, I can be more effective in responding, providing answers, delivering the performance that they expect or more. Now, when I'm not, and I have moments where my self-awareness is a little bit down, maybe I had a moment where I didn't quite get everything I wanted. I failed. There were pressures and challenges from people. Well, I start not paying attention as much, not being aware of what my desires are and where I can go to really make myself fulfilled and feel happy. Actually knowing, where am I? Why am I here? So I encourage you to do this. Every place you go. Now, there's easy ones to know this answer. If I'm going into the bathroom and you ask yourself, why am I here? There should be a pretty quick answer, right? I'm going to go to the bathroom, or I'm going to brush my teeth, or I'm going to wash my face. You know, there are very specific things that you're going to want to do when you're in the bathroom. You know, there's so many different, I digress a bit, there's so many different names for the bathroom that we probably forget. Water closet, washroom versus bathroom. Am I taking a bath or am I just washing? And then there's the water closet. That's an old one. Well, coming back to point. If I don't know for sure why I'm in a given space, that's a moment where you need to stop and take a breath and gather it all together, because you're starting to slip towards that black hole abyss that moves you down the mental health continuum from self-awareness and wellness to a more crisis-driven, perhaps, that's the extreme. Maybe it's a moment in time where, oh gosh, it didn't quite work that well. I thought I was going to do better than I did, and I didn't. You know, some error and failure. And you have moments of reflection where you really need to call upon your motivators, your desires, and recover, so that you don't slip into and past that black hole of illness. You get close to the other end of the spectrum of the continuum, where it's mental illness now. And look, we're all on the spectrum of cognitive processing and thinking, everything from, you know, autism to elation to any number of different states that we've labeled. The issue for me is to keep it simple initially and really recognize that I want personally, I hope you do too, to stay in a place of wellness. And to do that, mental wellness, and to do that, I've got to really know about myself enough so that I'm self-aware to a level that's comfortable for me, that recognizes those pockets of desire that define who I am, so I can quickly, without hesitation, identify and answer this question: why am I here? Or better yet, with that same question, this question: where am I? You know, sometimes you get so into things, you pick your head up and you go, oh gosh, I'm in my office. You just get so immersed into something, you forget exactly where you are. But it's every once in a while you got to pick your head up and kind of take a breath and immerse yourself back into the present day and have that self-aware moment. Well, as you think about, you know, what is my pulse, if you're not presenting to a crowd like my colleague Trevor Moad did, and I do all the time as well, you ask yourself, when you start your day, you ask yourself, it's all about me, and why am I here? So when I look at my team, right, my team of one, I first start off by asking myself, how do I know I'm ready? You kind of go through the checklist, right? Check down. What's my day like? Yes, it's about me. I'm going to focus on me and make sure that I'm good with me so I can be good with others and good for others. But in doing that, as I then project myself into my interactions with other people, and you want to measure and know through that measurement, what do I know about you? And with that knowledge, what kind of a process am I going to put in play to identify my success? Now, I started to talk about those processes a little bit when I introduced the be, do, have success model. Now, that's a success process about in the moment, right now. What do I want to be? Well, I'm going to be a talk show host right now, and I'm going to do this show about intrinsic motivation and measuring motivation. And my outcome is to give you some very specific steps in going through intrinsic motivation. Okay? So that then builds us to the question of, how do I benchmark my mental wellness? If I have a strong desire for, let's say, acceptance, and an average desire for independence, well, how do I benchmark that to my wellness? Those are two components that define who I am in my desires. So when I look at those two together at any given time, especially if I'm in a crowd, because I have a high degree of independence, I may not feel comfortable in a crowd because my desires are to be alone, by myself, with my own thoughts. And yet, my level of acceptance by others is really high, higher than my independence number. I'd say my independence number is kind of in the medium ground. So I can take a crowd, but there's a limit that I'm going to be around with that crowd, and I want to leave. But then at the same time, it's going to pull me a little bit because my desire for acceptance by members in that crowd might be high enough that it's going to hold me in. So I could find myself a little frustrated. So how do I benchmark myself so I maintain a good wellness? Well, I gave you just a real-time example of how to do that. You're constantly aware of those drivers that define you, and because you're aware of them, you're able to understand how they interact and how they're managed by you when you're by yourself. And then as you get with other people or you have projects and you're pushed and pulled by requests from people, you then have another way through those examples of experience how to benchmark again. You might come in contact with somebody that has just a high level of desire for acceptance as you do. And now the two of you might conflict when you're in a group together. I want to be accepted first. No, I want to be accepted first. That's when you need to take a breath and say to yourself, well, my degree of curiosity and understanding is pretty high. So I'm going to try to understand this person because we're kind of the same in our level of acceptance. That could be conflicting if I don't take a breath and step back and try to understand what's going on. So with that being said, let's just shift gears real quickly and go right into a measurement tool that I use for measuring your desires. Now, there is, to my knowledge, there is no model out there that's a scientifically based, validated through research, and that also addresses the data gathering biases that are inherent with this kind of a tool. There's nothing out there like that. Now there's things out there that say they measure motivation, but they give it letters. A Myers-Briggs, for example, other leadership tools, but they measure other components in addition to motivation. This is the Reese Motivation Profile, developed by Dr. Stephen Reese, is specific to measuring motivational skills through 16 different components, constructs, that look at the internal motivation. Now, before I can go any further into the details of Reese Motivational Profile, I want to talk a little bit about the differences between internal and external motivators. Now, I addressed it a minute ago when I mentioned desire for money. A lot of people say, they ask the question, what are you motivated by? And many people will say, oh, I'm motivated by money. Well, that may be true. Or you might be better placement and definition is, I'm attracted to money because what I'm really motivated by is the desire for safety, because money allows me to buy a house with locks on the doors. Or another one might be the intrinsic desire of food, for food. I'm motivated by money because I like good restaurants. I'm a foodie. My degree of desire for food is pretty high, and I really get into it. Not only do I get into it by the kinds of foods, but I like to cook it too. Those are examples of a high desire for food. And that, interestingly enough, is one of the constructs that's measured of desires in the Reese motivational profile. And I'll refer to it as the RMP from here on out. So when I look at internal versus external, the real meaningful ones, as is defined by the quote from Deming earlier, we're born with it. It's only by our experiences that we have a conflicting set of motivators that are external that have confused us a little bit. Well, I'm trying to remove the confusion. Push the external motivators to the side because they will become part of the discussion when you look at the internal drivers that define you. Like money. It identifies internal drivers, like food. Like, I want to have a really successful job. I desire the power of that job. I'm very physically active. Well, I've got to go to a really nice club. Well, money's going to buy all those things and put you in a position to do that. And your drive to have the best club for working out. Or maybe you're a golfer. Well, I want to go to a good golf club. I want a private club, not just a public club. That would be something that's going to push, that desire is going to push you to earn more money, to get the clubs that you desire to play at. Now, the other thing I'm going to say here is that when you're looking at any desire, especially intrinsic desire, because it's part of the core of who you are, no one construct, no one defining desire should be looked at by itself. If, for example, the desire for independence, if you have a high desire for independence, which means you like to be alone by yourself with your own thoughts, you may hang out with people here and there, but it's not a very active or very large group, nor do you stick with it for a long period of time, because you like independence. And if you also have a high degree of curiosity and a low level of acceptance, meaning I don't care if anybody accepts me or not, then you really, really want to be alone. You have to look at all of the constructs that defines you totally, holistically. And in the Reese motivational profile model, there's 16 factors. Now, Stephen Reese spent over 30 years looking at the world, 4 different continents, for 30 years looking at the different elements that people intrinsically desire, and he came up with 16. And he's had over 3,000 scholars review his work and validate his numbers, the statistics. So it's a scientifically derived set of constructs as well as the measuring tools that create the numbers that put a degree of value on each of the 16 constructs to measure your internal motivators. Now, as I say that, it brings up the term that I coined called the intrinsic motivational intelligence. The intelligence component, I'll start at the end and go backwards. The intelligence, you'll get motivated more about the RMP and measuring your desires when you look at the intelligence defined in this way. It's looking at all 16 factors. The intelligence of your awareness of your entire body and what drives it, what your brain thinks about to ask you to take the first step. If I'm very physically active, I'm going to take a first step and motivated with a first step because of that desire towards activities that move me, not that are sedate. And then if I look at my other desires that define me, and I look at, gosh, I really want to be socially, I want to have a lot of social contact. Well, more than likely, I better look at my independence number, because if my independence number is high, it's going to be probably in a sport because my social contact number is pretty high, there better be some activity around it. Like, for example, I've had some professional race car drivers. Now, many of them that are very successful are very independent people and don't care if they're accepted or not, but their social contact number is pretty high. and their physical activity number is pretty high. So they like to be in a very stimulating race vehicle, like IndyCar drivers are that way, drag racing drivers are that way. But the social contact number, there better be this kind of like party element. Like the crew is a team that the driver can be part of, even though the driver has a high desire to be independent, a low desire for acceptance. He doesn't care. She or he does not care if they're accepted. They just love to drive because they're by themselves in the cockpit of the car with their hair on fire. So there's an example of how to use the constructs together to come up with your intelligence. How aware are you of the different components of desire that make up the definition of who you are? And that should motivate you. You should get excited about that. And it comes from within. You're born with it. So have this awareness that helps you to understand what is your I am I. Get motivated about understanding these 16 components so that when you take the field, when you get in the car, when you step onto the court, wherever it is that you're going to compete and perform, you are aligning your desires in a way that you're going to excel at any given moment that is hooked up to your desires. It's what I tend to look at and what announcers, sports announcers talk about, or HR directors when they're looking at the cultures of corporate America. They say, oh, there's an intangible in that person that just seems to come out when things get tough. You know, and if we can isolate that person, independence, in a physically active scenario, they're going to excel. And we can use our intrinsic motivational intelligence as a way to identify where are the intangibles in these players. So coaches, leaders, team leaders, CEOs, VPs, whatever, in the corporate world, or coaches and teammates, when they know each other well enough and understand not only their own personal IMI, but they understand, and remember, that's first, because I say to you all the time, it's all about me. Understand your IMI as a means to practice your answering the question, it's all about me. Because it's not until that happens that you can go to teammates, colleagues, and understand how to help them with their IMI. So we're talking about intrinsic motivational intelligence. We're here on a Friday with streaming at KUHS Denver, having a great time, sharing with you ideas that will hopefully, knock on wood, will hopefully make you feel better about your desires and what makes you drive yourself to be the best you can be. So with that being said, the last picture I have on this segment is with Tiger Woods at the Masters. This was a shot when he was in the hunt, he was leading the field, and just look at that crowd. That crowd, now that crowd, each individual there is motivated by for some reason, right? They may like social contact, they may not care about being accepted, but they care about the event and the shapes and the forms and the colors that are there. Obviously, they like Tiger Woods, and they want to be around him to see him do what he does. It's really exciting to me to understand what people do, because when you understand your intrinsic motivational intelligence, and you've done it by measuring the 16 factors that define the RMP profile, it's your actions from those levels of understanding of intelligence that validates the reality of your presence. This is why I'm here. I love this game of golf for these reasons. This is what drives me to this game of golf. And then I would expect you to just knock the crap out of the ball at the tee box. And when that happens, you know that you are delivering actions and results in those actions that represent a drive from within. You're starting from within yourself to make the changes necessary in your body movement and the swing movement and then the ball contact to deliver what you expect to be delivered. Without that understanding and having a high level of understanding, so you have a strong, powerful IMI, intrinsic motivational intelligence, it's going to be very difficult for you not to have those great actions. It just flows. You know, the greats make something very difficult look very simple, like a Tiger Woods, you know, hitting a ball 300 yards. Eventually, at one point in his career, he added the weightlifting as another part of his physical activities. I have a golfer right now that's her whole premise. She was on the show last week. That was Betsy Kelly. She's very physically active. Her RMP is right on target with where she's going now. Now she's developing her own intrinsic motivational intelligence, so that her actions are guided by her desires. But until you really dig deep intrinsically and authentically, organically, into understanding the 16 components, it's very difficult to deliver the kind of actions you want. You can imagine it, think about it, you know, talk about, pray about it, but until you actually make the connections between the understanding of the data and then realizing what of the data are your strengths and what things need to be worked on, it's going to be difficult to create agendas of behavior that are going to blend and give you the improvement and give you the results that you should expect. Now, understand also, there is no perfect world. You still got to practice. You got to still keep it in check and work on it. Just like what Zig Ziglar says in this quote, motivation is like bathing. You need to do it every single day. So that basically, if I can integrate the IMI and the RMP here, you need to be taking the data you've discovered, like bathing, and apply it every single day. Use that intelligence, apply the knowledge about what those intrinsic motivators are and the degree with which you want them. And with that understanding, you will begin to deliver consistently the outcomes that validate how excited you are about. In the one example here with Tiger, it's golf. And he definitely, for many years, gave you the indication that he was good at what he does. And he's had, I don't want to imply directly or indirectly that Tiger has had an RMP. He has not. But I know enough about the people that have surrounded him through his career, whether they labeled it the way I've labeled the intrinsic motivation intelligence with 16 factors from the RMP, or Tiger's gone through, and he's gone through, I know for a fact, gone through a lot of different assessments. I would have liked to have had the opportunity to give him one that would have saved him a lot of time and money and still given him equal to, if not greater, results than he's already experienced. So with Betsy Kelly, she's in it early, and she will not have to go through the expense and time consumption that the hunt and find, seek and destroy missions in finding the tools that were going to help. But it's now at the time where we take a moment to reflect, as has been in the last few weeks a typical thing for me. It's the Kona Inn sunset that, gosh, just looking at it every time it pops up, no matter what state of excitement I am in or emotional presence I have with you today here at KUHS with this 360 Performance Show, it's just like, I just have to take a breath and reflect on that moment, and it brings me back that quick about what it felt, the coolness of the Pacific breeze and the comfort of being there with my partner and just sharing a great moment. It's pretty genuine stuff. It's interesting how nature brings you right down to the elements of the beginning. It's a very organic feeling. So as I do that, I'll take I'll hydrate. It's oftentimes a constant thought for me about what am I not doing enough of. And one of the things about the intrinsic motivational desires and motivating factors and the intelligence I've had is that I have a chart. I know where specifically I can go to work on things. I don't have to guess. And sometimes it's very humbling when I go back to the list and look at, oh my gosh. And this also gives me a time to say to you that there are many times these assessments that people do, especially in corporate America, there's just so many different vehicles out there. You don't have to do them every year, every quarter with the RMP. The RMP it's a scientifically validated tool for measuring human desires. That being said, it means that unless you have a major change in your world that changes your thought processes, that is a physically altering kind of thing. Like, for example, with my athletes, they retire. That's a change. Someplace in the first 2 years of their retirement, we will redo an RMP. Another incident, for me, as the example, I did the RMP and then I became a grandfather. Major life change for me. Perspective changer for me. Now, my business life didn't change much. There are certain aspects of my world that didn't change much, but that's a major life change. Redid the RMP. Slight differences, but not much. Another major one that happens a lot is retirement. You did an RMP, you retired. Corporately, I'm talking about. Athletes, same thing, but you're going to get a little different play with athletes versus non-athletes. Those kind of things are major life changes. You were single, and then you got married. I have athletes as well as corporate executives that have been working for many years as a single individual, where they push in it hard, and then they fall in love, they get married, do a new RMP. And that happens, not, it's not like every year that happens. There's going to be several years of consistency. And even when you have those major changes, it doesn't mean that the numbers with an RMP are going to alter that much. But when they do, you want to know it. You want to know what the shift is so that you can realign. Like I said, when I need to look at where I can improve, I've got a chart. So if you've had major changes, you want to see if the chart changes and identifies different aspects of how you might address the areas for you to improve on. So now we're into the mindfulness segment. We're going to talk a little bit about strategies. And interestingly enough, based on my last session, we're going to use the wellness strategies slide again and talk a little bit about what's in here. And the first one on the slide, and I'll relate it to the RMP, it's about discovering pleasure. When I first do an RMP, again, it's never altered. This is the first reaction I get. This thing was spot on. Now, that being said, some would look at that and say, well, wait a minute. If it's spot on, why did they need you? Well, being spot on with the 16 different measurements is why they need to do it. You get an actual numerical answer as to the degree of what is spot on. If you know that you are very organized, you're an orderly person, you want structure around you, you don't feel comfortable, and yet you didn't quite understand why people get on you for being 30 minutes early to a meeting, or why in that 30 minutes being early to a meeting, you had all your stuff out, you did a lot of research where a lot of the other people didn't. Well, that's because that's a pleasure point for you. Discover where your pleasure points are through the desires. That's part of the intrinsic motivational intelligence. That's raising your consciousness and your understanding through that examination of your pleasure points. Equally true, what are the pain points? We have that in corporate America. They're looking at cultural pain points. What's upsetting? Well, I ask, look at the parts that make up the culture. And first start off with, what are their pleasure points? Because pleasure points is where the greatest amount of productivity lies. As an owner of a company and looking at profitability and revenue growth, I want to know what's going to impact that growth potential and profitability first. That's why I want to look at discovering pleasure points with my intrinsic motivational intelligence, especially for me individually. And then culturally, we can group it all together and see, okay, where in the 16 profiles are the greatest areas that influence pleasure, positivity? Because as we do that, it's equally true to make sure that within the culture, within myself, am I capable, do I have the desire to want to communicate with people and share gratitude with them on a daily basis? Here's an example. A couple of the measurements of the RMP are acceptance and independence and social contact. I'll just pick those three. Those are primary ones. Because if you have low acceptance, which means you don't really care if anybody accepts you or not, and yet you want to be, you have a low independence, meaning I want to be part of a team a lot around people, that's the opposite of independent. You get me? Independent by yourself, low independence, I want to be with other people. And then the social contact is high. So that complements, social contact being high and low independence, that complements each other. You want to hang with people. You would be a person that would be, we wouldn't have to probably say a lot to you about sharing gratitude with other people daily. What we would have to do is, if your numbers were flipped in that regard, we would then be more sensitive to you to encourage you about why is it important to share gratitude? What will it do for you? What could it do for your team? What could it do for you in preparing for a performance if you're on the athlete side of things? If you're a salesperson, preparing for a call. If you are if you're finding it difficult to share gratitude with others as well as for yourself, you may not be suited for sales. Or if you are, you better have some really focused strategies on how to be forthcoming, either verbally, graphically, or both, in sharing your gratitude to your customers for buying your products. So the next thing that comes in is, this is really important when it comes to your intrinsic motivational intelligence, and being mindful of who you are and answering the question that I posed earlier is, why am I here? Why am I in this space? Well, one of the ways you're going to define why you're in this space is by your sharing your expectations with others. First, writing them for yourself. Here's what I want to do for today. Here's what I expect of others that I work with. And here's how I want to expect them to be accountable to me. And you lay those things out. It's part of your scheduling process. It's part of your planning process. But it starts with knowing who you are. Here's an example, similar to what I did with the gratitude daily example. Sharing expectations has a lot to do with planning, making it a part of your regimen, your process, and interacting with others. Well, that aligns directly with the order construct in measuring your intrinsic desires. What's your desire for order? That means being on time, structure, that type of thing. Now, in addition to that, the power construct, your desire for power and honor, honoring the agendas of others, if it's high, as well as the power number being high for your degree of desire for those could come in conflict with one another. Unless you have an integrity number that is middle, average to high, because then you're going to be aware of, and especially if you add the acceptance in there, if you've got a medium to high acceptance, it's also going to influence that. So you're not going to come off as an asshole. You're going to be more empathy. Your empathy will be higher. We will be able to identify your sharing expectations will be done in a way that considers others while not getting your agenda lost, but at the same time letting others being mindful of how you want it to end for you. Look, I need you part of this team. Here's my expectations and how we want to progress. I'd like you to be part of this. Give me your thoughts. Great. All right, we'll make some adjustments there, and then here's what I want out of it. If we are successful with this, this is my takeaway. So that way, with that example, everybody in the play is understanding about the expectations, you feel satisfied, and you also have it set up through this understanding of your desires, who's accountable for what. Because you don't want to have a posture of a desire for tranquility. If that's high, you better be someone who's asking people to be accountable and really clear on your expectations, because you don't want to have a lot of tension. That's the tranquility number. If you have high tranquility, you don't want to be frustrated. You want to put structure in place and people in place that are going to be complementary. So the area of asking for people to be accountable to the expectations you set, you might want to make sure you're looking at your team and how they influence you and how their intrinsic motivational intelligence is to you. So here's where I'm going to pause for a minute and kind of give you somewhat of an infomercial. If you're an employer, like the HR department, or you're the boss looking to get great employees, the RMP is a great way to really identify the characteristics of team members that are going to fit, that are going to intersect in ways that are going to strengthen your culture and have clear statements and sharing of expectations, and that the gratitude and thanks for doing great jobs or an effort. Maybe you didn't quite hit the target, but you had a great effort. The gratitude is there so that you can in fact discover the pleasure of your profile interacting with others. So that's my infomercial. It's really great for hiring and screening new candidates. Now, throughout all this process, there's a lot of layers. Look, we're talking about 16 different factors of measuring for the desires. That's a lot of stuff. This isn't for people who've never had an RMP done for them, it's not a short, quick fix. It's a process that you go into with your eyes wide open to benefit you, to build a better understanding. And here's a great example of that with professional athletes. I've had general managers, CEOs of companies, head coaches ask, why do we have to go through this data? I know it only took 30 minutes to do it, online on the computer, but why do we have to do that? And my first answer is, you get to understand these wonderful players, these professionals are being paid lots of money, these college All-Americans, they've already proven themselves on the field. We now get to know them so much better that we can quickly make decisions as to where to place them because of our understanding. It's deeper and more complete. And they know it too. There's little or no questioning as to why, coach, did you put me in there? It's absolutes, not guarantees, but definitely you know how to substitute. I have all kinds of stories about integrating coaches into this thought process and understanding of their intrinsic motivational intelligence, not just about themselves, but the more they know about themselves, they can integrate it to their players, to their other coaches on their staff. Now, that being said, as a setup for this last point I'm making on the wellness strategy, is forgiving yourself. We don't live in a perfect world. No matter how excited I am about tools like the RMP, which I've had the pleasure of being able to work with the IDS Publishing Company to help them develop the integration of this tool. It's not perfect. There is no perfection. You're gonna make mistakes. In fact, if you're not pushing it, if you're not getting excited to integrate yourself more into your understanding why you are present in certain places, you won't make mistakes. It'll be safe. It'll be boring, but you won't make any mistakes. I don't want to be around people that don't want to wrap their arms, their brain, their body around their hearts, their minds, around the potential for failure. Because then when you fail, you have the empathy, or hopefully enough empathy, to say, that's okay, we'll fix it. Because failure, we first forgive it, we move on, and within that realization and that humility, we're going to wrap our arms around it and really make it work. And maybe we'll look more closely at the 16 factors in the RMP to know where we have to be better at our integration and better at our working together. I'm excited about this stuff. I'm motivated. But I also know look, I've been working with the RMP for a lot of years and had some great results. And I'm just now in a good place to share some of those stories and those results through training. I'm beginning to certify individuals to become RMP certified masters so they can go out and teach and train people on how to arrive at and understand their intrinsic motivational intelligence and measure their IMI. It's just really good stuff. I have a high curiosity number. I have a high physical activity number. So I've got to be moving and active with this kind of stuff. So it just seemed logical and reasonable for me to create a training course and begin to train people how to become a certified RMP master. So with that being said, and also, by the way, just a shout out to the IDS Publishing Company and Maggie Reese and the wonderful people there. But here's a quote I want you to think about, since you've heard the things I've said to you about the RMP, your motivational desires, and how to measure them with an RMP. Because Stephen Covey, who was one of my mentors, said it really well in this quote. Motivation is a fire from within. If someone else tries to light that fire under you, chances are it will burn very briefly, because you're not the source of the ignition. You didn't take the time to understand, why am I here? What am I doing? What motivates me to stay here? That's you thinking about, what is the fire and how do I light it? That's what's exciting. And Stephen Covey writes in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that you've got to think about the end in mind. And I'm asking you to think about that every single morning you wake up by saying this mantra. It's all about me. Because that's a spark. That's the first strike on the emery board paper for the match to take off, to light the fire. But you're in control of it. You are the one that is the master of your future. And being aware of those people and things that influences you keeps you connected to your desires. Starting it that way every day, and then continuing to reinforce it, continuing to find other environments and incidences that you're going to light the fire. Basically answering the question, why am I here? Why did you call me to this meeting? I love that one in corporate America. And CEOs and leaders don't always like me to say this, but if you're called to a meeting and you get an agenda, and maybe you don't get an agenda, you just get an invite. Show up at this meeting at this time because you're part of this department. That's the first example to ask the question to the person who set up the meeting. Go see them face to face and ask them, why do you want me to this meeting? And they're going to say, well, I sent you an email. Did you get the email? Well, yeah, I got the email. But you never said anywhere in there, why should I be there? Even as casually as an agenda. So I might be able to decipher why I'm there. Hold people accountable. Ask them for rationale for why they expect you to be in that meeting, because then you know how to connect it to your desires. So being aware of the people and things that influence you keeps you connected to your desires, even in the simple example of being called to a meeting. Can you imagine what happens when an offensive lineman asks the offensive line coach in a position meeting, hey coach, why am I here again? It's happened. And they blamed me. But it was kind of funny at the time. In fact, this picture I have up here now is of Crockett Gilmore, who was a tight end for the Baltimore Ravens and succeeded. But he was one of those people that would ask that question. And he knew that it's a position meeting. We're going to talk about offensive plan, our responsibilities within that plan, the team we're going to play, how we're going to address them. And Crockett now is a defensive line coach for Colorado Mesa College, a university over in Grand Junction. But when he was a player, and I worked with him as a college player, he was that character. If you didn't give him a reason for why he was there, you did not have him engaged. And he's not an exception. This happens way too often. And it happens in schools, middle schools, elementary schools, when teachers don't give the kids an understanding of why you're here. Yeah, I know it's math class, but why am I here? What's the math? Should I have been prepared? You give kids excuses not to engage if you don't give them a process and purpose with intent within that process, like an agenda, like a poster at the door when you come in, like I used to do with my practices for basketball. There'd be a sheet on the gym door as you came in saying, here's exactly what we're going to do. So they knew exactly where they needed to go. I tried this one time. I had a practice where it was all silence except for a whistle blowing. And all I was doing, I told the kids up front, I'm going to test you on your knowledge of the agenda. And the only people that will make any noises will be you as players with your teammates and the whistle that the coaches blow. And it was amazing. It was, at one time we had a assistant principal come in and wondered why the coaches weren't talking. I loved it. But the practice, to their surprise, the practice was really going well. We finished. Just like with what the quote I gave to this picture of Crockett Gilmore when he scored a touchdown for the Baltimore Ravens. I'm paraphrasing what he had shared with me at the moment. It is not the accomplishment that is important, but rather the process that brought me here. Prepare for perfection. Deliver results. He was able to wrap his brain around that and finish because he has an understanding of what his drivers are and why he is present. I know why I'm present right now in this moment, to deliver you insights about being a better performer. And we do it every Friday here at 11 o'clock on KUHS Denver, streaming, gosh, I hope all over the world. We are kind of. But as you know, I'm going to take today's show, package it up, and polish it a little bit, not from what we say, but necessarily add some music, things like that, and put it on our podcast platforms. You can find us on Spotify under 360 Performance, or Apple, Google, whatever your favorite podcast platform is. We're on 8 different podcast platforms. Give us a look and a listen, and hopefully by doing that, your involvement, you're getting into it. Send us an email. Get on my website. Send us a comment. That's 360mindset.com. 360mindset.com. That's our website. Share a comment with us. We have a survey and some questions being asked on the podcast. So participate in those. Love to hear your responses and your thoughts, and I'll get back to you. But gosh sakes, get involved. Make it a part of your day to improve yourself by making the plans that help you to take the actions necessary to be the best you can be. I'm so excited about being here with you today, every Friday at KUHS, streaming live, but then putting it out there on the podcast so maybe it has an evergreen life. Maybe you'll find some nuggets of knowledge that will drive you to be even more than you even expected to be because of something we've shared with you today. Once again, I'm Dr. Whiteman. I'm your host. I'm also known as Coach. 360 Performance is every Friday, streaming live on KUHS Denver. Have a great day, everybody. Be well.